Awesome, awesome. Good morning, good morning, good morning again, my dear sister, Patience Ajoff Foster on the show today. I
Good
am super
morning.
excited. Good morning. For those of you joining us this morning, please go ahead and share to your network. It is going to be an amazing, amazing conversation with this trailblazer that I'm proud to call my sister and mentor. And if you haven't already liked our page, please do so you can follow us live. But we will be sharing to other networks, and it's going to be an amazing conversation. So I just like to say thank you so much, Patience, for coming on here today. I appreciate and celebrate you. And thank you for being who you are, the great leader that you are, someone in higher education who is blazing the trail. And I am so proud of the fact that you know exactly your identity and what you stand for. So without further ado, I'm going to allow you share your own story. Tell the audience who you are before we get into our discussion.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. G, for having me here today. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, and hopefully that people who are listening, viewing, that they will walk away with something. So I'm really honored that you invited me just so that we can sit down and have this chat and hopefully demystify some of the things that we don't often know about. So in terms of
Awesome.
me, and just who I am. So I am the executive director of diversity and inclusive culture at Drexel University, where I have been for the past over 10
Do
years
me
now.
a favor.
I think we're having some technical issues with your computer, but I think I'm just gonna, or with your connection. So I'm just gonna keep pushing forward. So again, before I even get to the point of what I do right now professionally, I wanted to talk about my own.
You're breaking up.
Are we okay now? Are we back on? Okay, you're muted.
Okay, I'm on now. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So
All right.
yeah, so I'll just go back and reset a little bit and start out from
Awesome.
sort of my own educational background because I think that is important for this conversation. So I'm a native of Cameroon and I did K through 12 in Cameroon. We actually do 14 years of school in Cameroon between the first to seventh grade, and then you do 5 years of what we call college or secondary education, and then 2 years of high school. So I did that in Cameroon. And then for undergraduate, I initially was looking at schools here in the United States and looked at a number of schools, actually visited the University of Pittsburgh from Germany, but then ultimately went to Knoxville College, which is a historically Black college. And that is important in the context of this conversation as well, because we're going to be using words like minority serving institutions, predominantly Black colleges and universities, predominantly white institutions. So I wanted to put that into context there. The other, and then after Knoxville College, which was a great experience for me, even in my own discovering my own identity, because one of the things I often say is you got to be your own version of Black. So it wasn't like, Black people are this homogenous group. Our friends from the islands got to be their own version of Black. Those of us from Africa, even our friends who were from the United States or African Americans, there were also a lot of variation there. And you were unapologetic about your identity in the classroom, on campus, and in whatever space you occupied, which created for a really rich learning experience. And then I went to University of Pennsylvania for graduate school, which is not only a predominantly white institution, it is also considered one of the 8 Ivy Leagues in the United States. So that experience was really dynamic in of itself because I made a lot of friends there. I made lifelong friends as a part of that experience. even the program, because I was in the School of Social Policy and Practice. You have people who are approaching life as social change agents, and even faculty who see themselves as social change agents. So that experience was great. However, there were still many instances where I felt like I did not belong. I remember in particular having one conversation with the program director at one point where I said I felt like I didn't belong. I was very explicit about it. And I felt like one of the things was when someone else made a comment in class. I was the only Black student in my cohort, by the way. And so I made a lot of and so if I made a comment in the classroom and others made a comment, there was sort of like people picked up on what someone else said, but then people would hardly pick up on what I said. And so there was that, which was signaling to me that maybe I wasn't smart enough to be in that space, or I wasn't good enough, or I didn't belong in that space. When, in fact, that was the contrary, right? And I can share other outcomes, and even my grades didn't reflect the fact that I didn't belong there. And then now I work at a predominantly white institution, which is a research one institution, so one of the largest universities in the country. And that experience now, even as a professional staff and university administrator, at least in this space now, I have the opportunity to actually be that person or be able to bring another perspective, another voice, and also with my diverse background and different dimensions of diversity, be able to bring that into the room when we're thinking about decision making, our systems, our structures, which we're going to talk about later. The other thing I would end up as I talk about my educational journey is that I'm now a PhD candidate at Cabrini University. And this part also, there was another dimension that was thrown into it when I was looking at different schools. So first of all, when I started working at Drexel, I was advising students who were going primarily online. And I had a bias personally because I felt like online education wasn't as rigorous as the face-to-face experience. And so I was challenged by my supervisor at the time to pursue, to complete a certificate program. So I did the graduate certificate program. And through that experience, I found out how wrong I was about online learning and about how rigorous it is, and that it's also for a particular kind of student who knows themselves more. However, I walked away from that experience knowing that for me, what's most ideal is hybrid, because I like having the best of both worlds. So I want to have that face-to-face interaction so that when those conversations emerge in the classroom, we can tease them out a little bit more. And I also want to have the flexibility where I'm completing some of the work independently. So when I was looking for a doctoral program at this point in my life, I knew I didn't want to quit my job. I didn't want to stop working full time. I also have a family. And so I knew that I didn't want to compromise my family. And I also knew that I didn't want to take forever. And so I found the perfect program for me, which is Cabrini University's doctorate in organizational development and change. And what that did is it has a cohort model as well with people who are like-minded and in similar life circumstances for the most part, and are also looking for that rigor and want to sort of have that marriage between research and practice. So this scholarship and practice where we're able to apply what we're learning right away. So I share this educational journey because it's important as I even reflect on my own identity, since we'll be talking about diversity and belonging, how we belong in the different academic institutions, why it's important for those of us who are on the other side, like professional staff, faculty, administrators, that we're recognizing that people come to us with different experiences, different identities. And so how do we capture all of that, or how do we create spaces where everyone belongs? So in a nutshell, that's kind of my educational journey. And I wanted to start with that because, like I said, we'll probably be, throwing some words like PWIs, HBCUs, and we wanted our audience to kind of know what we were talking about if they didn't already when we start throwing those acronyms.
Awesome, awesome. I love that. And let me just put it out there. We come from the same country, from
Yes,
Cameroon. You
yes.
know, we have both been to HBCUs. So look at the products of HBCU.
Hey,
So, hey, we are doing something right, right? So
yes.
I really honor that. And your journey is amazing because I was one of those that also had to go from a face-to-face instruction to an online education with my PhD, which in the beginning I had the same fears and concerns that you had, but it is doable, especially the flexibility of it for those out there that are looking into it. It is very flexible. You can still get the same rigor. There is cohort bridge programs out there. So it is out there that it is doable. The
And I'll,
flexibility is awesome.
and
It's
I'll
awesome.
add another piece to that as well. It is, I mentioned it's for a different kind of students. So if you're in an online program, for example, as primarily online, I know we're in COVID and they're remote, we're doing remote as well. But if you're doing online learning for someone who is out of high school, hasn't had work experience, or just went straight into a brick and mortar and haven't had work experience, that may not be the best experience for you, because online really is targeted towards people who are able to, like, I'm sure you would agree that instead in my undergrad education, a lot of the things that I would talk about or cases we would talk about in class were cases that we studied in a textbook. And then when you sort of transition and have more experience, you're getting language for things that you're already experiencing in the workplace. And so again, it's a different kind of student where you're really able to bridge that divide, and really be, for how I say it, a better employee as well as a better student.
Absolutely, I agree with that. And Adora said she is a Cameroonian by association. Thank you, Adora.
Well, that's
So let's
awesome.
dive right into it. So we have all heard this phrase, one size fits all, which is a description of a product that would mean fit in all instances. In terms of education, that would mean one style of teaching is suitable for all students, regardless of their background. Every student, though, no matter their background, should have a chance at a great education from a school that puts their unique needs first. This is a two-part question. Give us your perspective on this. And secondly, how does not recognizing students' uniqueness impact their potential to succeed, especially if they're Black, Indigenous, or people of color, especially when they're in a predominantly white institution?
So thank you so much for that question. I think one of the things when we talk about diversity, for instance, some people think it's a code word for something. And I've actually heard, like, people have actually said this to me, like, why don't we call it what it is? And your question is really important because we have the responsibility, if we're looking at our educational missions, which is really this social contract with society, that we're going to train or educate the next generation of leaders, regardless in whatever discipline, then we have to be honoring the people who come to us in society. And so to the point about the one size fits all, even before COVID, in recent years, what we've been seeing, which I think it's a really exciting trend, is that students are showing up and taking up space. So at mine and other predominantly white institutions, for instance, we have, like, students who are Black will show up and say, hey, I'm Black too, and I don't have to hide behind that. Or students who are, who identify or are on the autism spectrum. We actually have a program, which is the Drexel Autism Support Program, ran by one of my friends, Amy Edwards. So the students are coming in and saying, I am on the spectrum and I am here and I want to take up space. Or women in engineering, whereas maybe 10, 20 years ago, if someone came in who was like the other, it's like, okay, just put your head down and do what you're supposed to do and then leave. And so what that has led in more recent years, and especially now with racial injustice at the forefront of our nation's dialogue, it's that students began rioting because they wanted to see faculty who looked like them. They wanted to see themselves represented at the institutions. And, and so what we have done for far too long is that we've had standardized test scores that say everyone has to fit into this box. What we've done is this is the way we teach this, and this is the content that we teach. And so when a student walks into a classroom, for example, and cannot relate to any of that, the other part of that narrative is that we've put people in certain buckets. When we talk about first generation, oftentimes the image of that is someone who's Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. And that is a disservice to both groups. And then when we look at the standardized test component, what we're doing is we're also saying, well, if we want to diversify, then, or if we want to attract Black students, for example, then this is the only thing we ought to do. We ought to look at our reevaluate standardized test scores. We ought to offer scholarships, and we ought to offer programs. All of that is great. However, the challenge is that not all Black students will fit that mold, and not all white students are not first generation. Not all rural students share the same experiences as someone from one of the coasts. So it's really stepping back and recognizing that we have to be intentional about how we create these spaces, because education is not a one-size-fits-all. And when we look at the content, regardless of the discipline, who were the people who were studying it first? When education started, it was for higher ed in the United States, it was for elite white men. And so that's the group that studied, and people bring their perspectives and their experiences into whatever scholarship it is that they're doing. And that then becomes the standard for that particular discipline. So what we're really saying is it's not a one size fits all. We're challenging ourselves, even in our own institutions, especially now, to really recognize that there's been an evolution of human beings, and that we have different students coming into our institutions, and that we have a responsibility to them and to society to be creating spaces where everyone feels like they're part of it, because that's the only way we're going to be able to really grapple with and solve the 21st century problems, or even move beyond that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Listen, what you just shared is phenomenal. I'm just going to ask our viewers right now, if you're watching, please go ahead and share. I think we all need to hear this discussion, this conversation. It is well worthy information. So if you have not already shared, please go ahead and share in your networks. Thank you so much. You know, that response you just gave took me back home. It took me to my own experiences. I heard the word identity. I heard the word disability. I heard the word Black. I heard the word first generation white. These are things that as educators, we sometimes take for granted. But yes, it is not a one size fits all. So we have got to adapt to what we have in the classroom. So with that said, I'm going to follow up with that discussion to say, with your experiences and the fact that you speak so many languages, 5 at least, and you have traveled the world, and knowing that language is an important element of culture, how have these experiences affected those perceptions that you were talking about embracing cultural differences, and how has it influenced your leadership style, and how can other educators emulate those types of behavior?
I think, and I think that's such a great question. One of the things, like I lived in Germany as well, and so that also exposed me to another, to a different dimension of culture. And so I think the languages help me connect with different people. And it's not just the linguistics or the phonetics of the language, it's also the language of culture. What do people, how comfortable are you just asking people? And also the language of human beings. I think one of the things in my role, especially now, one of the things I'm hearing from people, particularly white people, is that we don't know how to talk about race. And so one of the things I challenge folks with is, well, let's look at the Black person as a human being first. And when someone hurts, what do you do? When someone's angry, when someone's frustrated, how do you communicate with them? How are you authentic and how are you honest? And in my work, having the ability to speak multiple languages actually helps me connect with students of different backgrounds, right? I shared recently, like my office has a number of flags in it, and it's an ever-growing list. I started out, first of all, just having them because of the 2010 World Cup. And all the African countries that were represented, I bought their flags because I knew they weren't going to the finals. And so I was like, okay, I'll take one flag every time someone gets knocked out. And it was a good game in the office. So then people started identifying with the flags, and I started adding more and more. And I'll have students say to me, well, you don't have an Iranian flag on there. And I'm like, guess what? We're ordering one right now, and we're adding it to it. So there's both the language, and there are those artifacts that communicate to people that we see you when they walk into my office or when they interact with me. And I think it's extremely important because I'll share with you, in the one instance, I had a student from Cameroon who was born and raised here. And she came to me and was really excited to work with a particular faculty member. Who also does work in Africa, is a white male. And this student was really excited to work with them on their work because they saw like a lot of connection and wanted to really continue to hone their skills outside of the classroom. So I spoke to the faculty member. The faculty member was also excited. We made that connection. And then the faculty member came back to me and said, I spoke with the student and they were not really interested, or they didn't seem interested, their body language. And so I said, that's really strange because they were really excited about this when they talked to me about it. So I said, I'm going to talk to the student and let you know what I find out. So then when the student came in and we were having a conversation, I noticed that when she would be responding to me, she would be looking down. And so it was her body language that was communicating that she wasn't interested. And then if we look at that cultural component of it, right? When we grew up in Cameroon, what our parents always say, don't look at me in the face when I'm talking to you. And then I joke about my mom, like sometimes she'll say, don't look at me in the face when I'm talking to you. And then I'll look down and she'll say, look at me when I'm talking to you. So then I'll be doing this the whole time she's like talking to me. But in this case, this student actually wasn't, it was their body language. And it was also the faculty members' unawareness, because we know that our students from some Asian countries present the same way. And so one of the things that in that instance, I conveyed that to the faculty member, but then I also had a conversation with the student. And one of the things I said was how I overcame that, because for me as well, it was daunting to be looking at people in the face. But in the American culture, it's really important for trust building. So then I said, well, always bring a notepad with you. And then when someone's talking to you, you're looking down and taking notes of what they're saying. And then when you're comfortable, look up at them. When you start feeling uncomfortable, write something down. That lets them know, that signals that you're engaged, and you're also building your confidence to be able to communicate with people where you're looking at them straight in the eye. Now, again, that story just shows like that cultural awareness and sensitivity and the ability to speak multiple languages. Ultimately, unfortunately, the student transferred to another department to work with a faculty member who was a woman. But that is sometimes the cost, right? And they were ultimately able to walk away with something that hopefully they can continue to use in their career. So I think being able to speak multiple languages is, it has helped me. It has provided me with access, like our Persian students from Muslim countries, when they show up and, I can, say a couple of things that in Arabic, they feel really reassured. They feel like I belong in this space and can come and have conversations about different things that they're grappling with, not related to their ability, their intelligence, or even being able to complete the work that they're doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because your race or your color should not determine how intelligent you are. Exactly. But I'm gonna go back here on Facebook. You're getting some love, girl. Linda says, Adora, we are in each other's head, and that's a great technique. As Adora said the same thing. And Lorraine says, flag displays are such a powerful and tangible way to demonstrate inclusivity and that everyone is valued, loved, that you do this. And you're just getting love. And Linda also says, yes, language of culture and human beings. So it is awesome that, you know, that student had that experience. It's something we all take for granted, but that's our culture. Right. And by not being able to maintain that face-to-face contact, it doesn't mean you're stupid. It doesn't mean you're not interested, but that's the body language, and that's just simple communication. So sometimes I say that we all have to steal those teaching moments and educate others. Like the student probably was not able to educate the faculty member, probably looking at it from teacher-faculty relationship. But sometimes if we're building those trusting relationships, it allows the student to open up and maybe behave differently. But the faculty member hopefully learned a lesson and will never make the same judgment again.
I will say that to their credit.
That is powerful.
I will say that
let me jump right on to the next question. Be mindful of your time. So, according to patients, can you hear me?
I am here, and I saw you were frozen for a little bit.
I guess it's my internet. So anyway, I was jumping right into the next question, which is based on statistics from the National Center for Education. It says that 56% of all college students were white in the fall of 2017, which is down from 30% in 3 decades, compared to 76% of full-time faculty members. And this is going to projected to continue going down. So I am sure you agree that diversity is valuable, that diversity is an agent of inclusion, and we are stronger as a nation when people of various backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives work together. With your experiences as a higher ed administrator, how can diversifying the professorate benefit both students and faculty?
I think that is such an important question, because we see it in businesses where people look at their customer base, right? Like, what segments are they targeting? However, we haven't been as effective at doing that in higher education. That's not to say there are not challenges in businesses. I think what has happened where they have perhaps maybe a leg up on the higher ed is that, you know, that this argument about the business case has been made now for a while. And while people may not always heed to some of the issues that are raised around that or address them, I think at least that conversation is happening. Now, in higher ed, what happened or what has happened over time is that if we even look at policies and legislations, I mentioned that I'm an HBCU grad because prior to the desegregation of schools in the mid-50s, Black people couldn't go to colleges. And so they were finding their own schools, institutions, so that descendants of enslaved people could have an opportunity for an education. And so even after schools were desegregated, it took a while. It took a better part of 2 decades to get to a place where institutions started having diversity, or at the time, affirmative action policies on campus. However, that stayed primarily at the student level. That focus was at the student recruitment level because some of it was also tied to funding. And so now fast forward to 2020, and if we're looking at that number, if we start peeling the onions, if we look at how many, the percentage of students that are Black, for instance, in higher ed, it's about 14%, which is right on target with the total population. However, in terms of faculty representation, the percentage is only 6%. And so despite efforts in decades, and if we look at Latinx students, that percentage is 19% on the student side and 6% on the faculty side as well. And so I talked a little bit at the beginning of this that there were, students were protesting because they wanted to see themselves reflected in the professoriate. They wanted to have faculty who could share their experiences. They wanted to also see themselves in the course materials, particularly at predominantly white institutions. And so it is important for institutions to be able to look at these trends side by side, because often what happens is we have enrollment management working with students, and there's a silo there. And then we have the provost office working with faculty. And even in that, you have the deans working with their different disciplines, and department chairs working with the different subfields within their disciplines. And so there's so many silos that sometimes you may have, for instance, a biology department working on faculty diversity, and the chemistry department is just continuing along as if nothing's, like we're not, and these are just examples. And it adversely impacts even retention for academic institutions, because if a student's walking in a classroom and they don't have that experience, or like the example I shared just previously, that student transferred to another department, that is real dollars right there, right? And also being transparent with the data at the institutions, because there is a myth in some cases that if I see a Black student on campus at a predominantly, and this is not everybody, but certainly our students hear this throughout their experience in the class, around campus. When I see a Black student in an engineering class, for example, I'm looking at them as if they're only there because of affirmative action, not because they're smart enough to be there and should be there. And they already got a scholarship. So I didn't get a scholarship because they got a scholarship. And so being transparent with those numbers so that we're seeing who's actually paying. The other thing is we're starting to see a trend among Black parents, particularly middle-class parents who are saving up for college or have ways to pay for their kids' education, who are saying, you know what, my kid's gonna go to an HBCU because they've lived this experience in a predominantly white neighborhood, and they're going through, and so we're starting to see that trend as well. So if you ask me why institutions should take this seriously and really look, I think it is a sustainability issue, because in the same way that we're not patronizing businesses that don't see us as people, it's similar. If you have a student who feels like they're other, and it happens on the faculty side too. If you have, lone woman faculty in engineering, at some point they'll leave, and then we repeat that cycle. Or lone Black faculty, lone Hispanic Latinx, lone Native American, regardless of their own identity, if they show up and they don't feel like they're a part of that, they're not there for their expertise first. I'm not saying I ever stop being a Black person, or I ever stop being a mother, or I ever stop, but that I got up and got dressed and came to this job because I have a role and I was hired to do that role, and I shouldn't be spending time, regardless of what it is, I shouldn't be spending time trying to justify that I am smart enough or that I actually know what it is that I'm doing. So I think those are all things that as institutions we ought to be looking at, and then examining faculty diversity and student diversity together and not separate, and really using a systems approach so that we're looking at trends, we're looking at data, we're looking at even the financial well-being of the institution, we're looking at the environment, and we're really taking a look at our curriculum and all aspects, our policies, our structures, who has power, who has access. So looking at all of that so that regardless of who's showing up on our campuses, they feel like they belong there and don't have to spend time finding ways to cope.
Absolutely, absolutely. You could not have said it any better. That sustainability, the system approach, human-centric approach, that is one of the reasons why when I was at Delaware State University, I started the annual celebration of cultural heritage, because that brought the entire campus together, and not just having the silos in the different departments of who was who in what department and who was from where. Because we put together a system where we could identify what countries the student came from. Same approach with the flag. We had flags from every country represented within the department and within the university. So things like that do help to sustain those diversity strategies. So with that, I want to be cognizant of your time. So how does actually having faculty that look like the students impact their achievement, their academic achievement?
So we have something, there's a term called the black tax, or the race tax, but mostly the black tax. And what that is, initially it was economics, right? And those of us from Africa can really relate to this. When you make it, you bring up your whole family as well. You know, and it's the same for Black people here. The person who makes it, you have to look out for your people. So initially it was economics. And it's evolved to really the tax that you pay to signal that you belong in the space that you belong in. And so when we talk about like faculty, for example, you'd be hired to do something because of your expertise, because of something you studied. And then when you come in, you're having to respond to all the Black students because they see you and they want their feelings validated. What we're also doing is our students are not only getting a college experience, but now they have the burden of being activists. Because to your point, if I want space here, then I need to create it. And so while that is great, and we want to continue to encourage our students, the onus is also on us to be able to make it easy on them so that if a student's pointing something out, then they don't have to spend all that time trying to create the space because then their grades suffer. And so I think it is important that students see people who look like them, because what we're noticing, especially for the faculty or even myself, right? Like those of us, I call them back channel conversations, where a student looks and they see somebody who looks like them and they come in and they say, wait, I've been experiencing this, you know, where they feel like I can really share how I feel as opposed to posing and trying to find ways to cope within a system, which doesn't always come natural to me. So I think that is important. So we see where even when we have Black faculty, even if they're not in a student's discipline, the student will go out of their way to find that Black faculty because you get me. Or regardless of the, you know, dimension of identity, and international faculty, when you see someone who's from somewhere where you come from, you're like, oh wow, you get me. You think there's something that you can relate to that person, just as you, without having to try to convince them that you actually belong in the space that you belong in. So I think it is incredibly important, especially for retention. Because if I'm a student, like we often hear, even at my institution, we'll hear students say, I've only had one Black professor throughout my 4 years here, or throughout my 5 years here if they're doing co-op. And so then the question becomes, why is that? You know, if it wasn't important or significant enough for them, they wouldn't be raising it. But it's just having someone else validate your experience for you, having someone see you for who you are, having someone reassure you, and having someone cheer you on without having to remind you that you may be in a space or without you having to prove yourself worthy of being in that space.
Absolutely, absolutely. You said one word that really hit home: posing. What advice? I mean, posing is like trying to hide your identity.
The coach
to get within that surrounding, to adapt within your environment. What advice, based on that, would you give an immigrant student who is starting life fresh here in the United States, new to campus, or maybe just even within the community? What advice would you give them based on your experiences about having a sense of identity and how to move along?
That is such a tough one. I think it's tough because immigrant students will often so like, and we've done like, you know, qualitative studies on this, where immigrant students don't see themselves in racial terms first, because race is very much embedded in the US culture. And so sometimes, while the microaggressions that they may be experiencing, or the need to pose or code switch, while that might be because of their racial identity, they may be trying to think it's like the immigrant identity. So in terms of specific advice, one of the things I always tell people is find out who you are in this season of your life, because that is how you're going to be authentic. That is how you're going to decide how you show up on your terms. But unless you spend some of that time with yourself, and it doesn't matter what identity, unless you spend some of that time with yourself, finding who you are and how you're showing up in this space, I think we kind of sometimes want to go with the wind. Okay, this is what we're doing right now. Oh, I'll try to do this. And this is what we're doing over here. I'll try to do this, or I'll try to do it this way so that I can belong. The other piece of that, what I find with immigrant students also is because you chose to come here, there's like a different level of resiliency. The piece that I think has more nuance is the first generation American students. So students from Cameroonian parents, Chinese parents, or that first generation, there's like this trying to figure out which identity, and unless there's a solid foundation of support in the home, and one of the challenges, to be more specific, is that oftentimes there's this like, you're going to be a nurse, a medical doctor, a pharmacist, a professor, and an attorney. Anything outside of that, I don't get the career. So you'll have a student who wants to study design, and they're wrestling with that. And so I think it's finding out that identity, and sometimes we'll meet with parents, and we're, in some cases we'll say you're spending nearly $70,000 here, and your student is not interested in pre-med, and they're actually failing, but they're really good at this other thing. And so the student is going between those two identities. So I think really ultimately it's about finding out who you are as an individual and how you show up your best self in your terms. And it's okay when you don't show up in your ideal form. Just be aware that's how, and that, by the way, goes for anybody.
I love that. I love that. Know your identity while showing up in your space. So that is powerful and deep. I like that. So the last question to that section is, how can faculty then promote sensitivity to racial and cultural differences in the classroom? I ask this because I have had the privilege of being in both worlds, an immigrant student with an accent and a faculty member with an accent, and the experiences were challenging, to say the least. But I want to hear your perspective on that and suggestions of how we can better promote that for our audience.
So I actually thought about being at a conference once, and one of the things I said to that accent point is that, where people say, oh, you have an accent, or you have an accent. And I said, well, if you're having a hard time understanding me, chances are I'm having an equally hard time understanding you. But I'm making an effort. So how about we kind of meet halfway? So in terms of what we do, and one of the learning and development workshops that I do for faculty and with faculty is implicit bias and microaggressions. And it looks at all of these different dimensions, those subtleties, right? Those comments that people make without even realizing that they're alienating a segment of students in their classrooms. So again, and one of the things I will say, because one of the activities we do is that we do the implicit association test, a Harvard study, and then we talk about sort of what was surprising about the results for you. And, I'll share, I'm like, oh, well, on race, I am 50-50. I don't have a preference for white people over Black people and vice versa. But when it comes to physical disabilities, I have a bias towards people with who are able-bodied. So it's not to say, oh, you're a bad person because of that, because we all have biases, and it's, relative to our exposure. If I haven't been exposed to different accents, I'm going to have a bias. I'm going to tune out when someone whose accent is different from mine, especially if I think they're in my space and I expect them to be speaking a certain way. Then that gets in the way. That bias kind of kicks in. And so what so then what I do say in that moment is, and then people debate, the debate then evolves to the validity of the instrument. And you have like these scientific research terms that are thrown back and forth. And I just let it happen. And it never fails. Someone says, is it a problem that we're debating the validity and actually the research design and all of that? And then I say, well, that's your occupational identity taking over. Because as a faculty member, you're trained to question. What is research? You're asking questions and finding and looking for answers to those questions. And then what happens is you become an expert, but you're an expert in a sub-discipline of a subfield. And, and then now when you step back and you're dealing with people, particularly in a classroom setting, you're still seeing yourself as an expert. So that when issues of identity emerge, you're trying to approach it intellectually only, even if you're not an identity scholar. So one of the things is recognizing that, I always say, you're a human being first before you're a faculty member. And so think about how you feel when there's that microaggression and then it raises tension in the classroom. You have to be in tune with your feelings before you can respond in a particular way. Design your courses to be inclusive. Think about the examples that you use. Like if you have, for example, the evolution in sociology, don't have that picture and then put the picture of a modern day Maasai in the end of it, because you're signaling that only Black people, particularly people from Africa, evolved out of apes. If you're having a conversation about evolution, look at your course materials. Center marginalized voices. Who else could have been studying this, or what else are we missing? And design your courses in a way that's inclusive. And the other piece is, if you have group work in your class, especially, but it's just good practice for any course, start out with rules of engagement so that everyone agrees with it. And then when that tension emerges, when there's conflict in the group assignments, you have that tool to refer back to, and then you can also manage the emotional parts that come with it. So there are a number, of techniques and really best practices related to inclusive teaching, where every student feels welcome regardless of their way of learning or their own social identity background, what accent they have, where there are those practices that you can put in place, and then also develop yourself as a person, because you can't always anticipate every scenario that might happen. Exactly. So that when that does happen, you're equipped to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I found that, even at the beginning of the class or the semester, having the students in a particular classroom share where they come from and their beliefs and values kind of helped with communication as we went along the semester. That's something that worked for me, Yeah. But let me check your chat room here. Catherine says, very knowledgeable, thank you. Brenda says, everyone has an accent. Linda says, yes. Adora, my goodness. Wendy says, know your identity, bravo. Let me see if there's any questions here. Tanya says, yes, I absolutely love this. You are so right. And Agnes says, interesting, and thank you. So to the next question, girl, is we are living in some very unprecedented times. It's no news to anybody on here, from COVID-19 to the fight for racial equity and social justice after the brutal murder of George Floyd and many others before and after him. It is a no-brainer that when we build diverse, inclusive, and unified cultures, that everyone can thrive. So what advice can you give to business owners, company leaders, local church and community leaders, or educational institutions that currently do not have diversity programs or strategies? What can you advise them to do?
So I think for me, it is important for organizations first to be able to, whatever strategy or approach they're taking, that it's sustained beyond when conversations or the dialogue about racial equity is over, or when it stops trending, because this has been going on, and so now is the moment. People feel like, oh, we have to be responsive, and so in some cases there are no statements at all. In other cases there are statements, and then in other cases you actually have actions that are being put in place, including at my institution. So the first thing is recognize that people's frustrations are real, their anger is real, racial injustice is real, and that these are people's experiences. Don't try to change people's narratives for them. And then own your own part in perpetuating that system of oppression. Like, what is it that I have been doing to drive this system? And I know people are on different sides of the spectrum on this. And the other thing is, hold on to the voices as well, like the dissenting voices, the people who say, oh, this is overrated, this is not my experience, the meritocracy folks who say everyone can make it, if only they work hard, if only they apply themselves. Now, onto the strategy piece. First of all, you have to look at why it is that you exist as an organization. What is your mission? And then think about, where does this fit in? If you are an academic institution, what is our mission? To educate students, to create knowledge, to be of service to society. What kind of society? Is it only a particular dimension, or do we really want to be a space? Do we want to continue to protect sort of whatever history we have as an organization? Or do we want to then pivot into where society is today? And then, you can begin to develop your strategy. You can look at that point, you can look at your policies, you can look at your organizational structure. Again, you can look at who has power. If your entire board of directors is primarily white male, and your leaders, the executive leadership or cabinet is primarily white male or white, then certainly reevaluating all of that. Like, how did we get to this place? And then actually commit resources. And recognize it has to also be a business proposition for you. Because if you're just doing it because it's trending now, it's not going to be sustained. Then we're going to develop what I call parallel processes. We're going to maybe have like some workshops, which, by the way, for me, I think those are incredibly important, though they are more window dressing. Because if we don't do all of these work behind the scenes, then we're trying to change behavior, but don't have the systems and structures to support the kind of behaviors or promote the kind of behaviors that we're looking for. So, really anchoring whatever initiative it is to your mission, because that's also how your and your organizational strategy, because that's the only way your board of directors are also going to support that, especially now in COVID where resources are lean. So I think it's really important not to fall in. And then the one thing I should also mention is that there are also immediate things that you have to do. There are immediate responses that you can give. So low-hanging fruit, make sure you're being responsive to that. Like at my institution, for example, created an anti-racism task force, a Center for Black Culture. Those are some of the things that are low-hanging fruit. However, the strategy piece is going to take longer because we want to be intentional. We want to look at data. We want to be able to make sure that, again, we leverage this momentum so that we're not hearing the same unfortunate stories for our BIPOC students, our faculty, and our professional staff in a year or two from now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because those strategies are not just going to work right away. It's a 3 to 5 year and hopefully sustain it for the long process. But I like the resources, because if you want your faculty, your students, the entire organization to be more productive, you have got to supply the resources for them to do what needs to be done. So I like that. And I want to be respectful of your time. I did do a little bit of digging, and I hope you don't mind me sharing this. I went to your Facebook page, and you had this phenomenal post from 2018. And it shares a story of you arriving in this country as a visitor in 2003. You were then in Germany, and you visited University of Pittsburgh, and you just shared how grateful you were of how good you received 5-star treatment that included, the shuttle ride, them taking you back and to and from the airport and wherever you had to visit. You even had a self-guided tour within downtown Pittsburgh. But one thing that happened to you, and I believe this has had a great impact on you, was the fact that you got lost. And you could not trace your way back from where you were within that downtown Pittsburgh. So you met this person whom you had to ask questions to on how to get out of where you were. I can only imagine how you felt at the time, probably frustrated and felt completely lost. And during your conversation, you informed this person that you were just visiting from Germany, and this was your first time. And this gentleman, his response struck a chord on me this morning. I could not do without sharing this. The gentleman said to you, welcome to America, my country, your country, everybody's country. That is deep, that is impactful. And you said, as I wrestle with my own understanding of all the isms that seem to plague our society more often than not these days, I choose to focus on the gentleman's response because it sums up with the spirit of this great country, in my opinion. It keeps me hopeful that for all the negativity, many continue to fight for social justice, equality, equity, respect, and common human decency. I love that. This could not have appeared in front of me at a much better time than now, with everything we're going through and what I believe in. You even also shared in that about your 7-year-old niece calling you and asking you if the leader of this country was going to send you back to Cameroon. And this is how you responded. Kaylin, you do not need to worry because anti-patients ain't going nowhere. But, in bold letters, I will continue to exercise my right to vote as a human who is Black, woman, immigrant, Christian, wife, mother, straight, ally, Cameroonian American taxpayer. I love that. That is a true sense of identity. That is a true sense of confidence. Yes, you're all of this, but above all, you're so humble. And I think what I take from this is each and every one of us as citizens within this country, whether you're from Africa, whether you're from the Caribbean, wherever you're from, we make up the salad bowl for this country. We are contributing members of this society and this nation. We can no longer sit on the sidelines, but be on the table and bring value to the table, demand our voices to be heard. And for those voices who cannot, for those people who cannot have a voice, let us be a voice for them. That is why eUnity Solutions is a voice for the voiceless. That is why we're providing this platform for experts such as you, my dear sister, to come on here and share the wealth of information you have done. Hopefully, those listening to us today have learned 1 or 2 things that they can use to influence their community, their families, their parents, because this fight for justice is not just for you and I. It's not just for individuals. It's for the entire nation. It's for the world, as a matter of fact. But we each have to do a piece, and we cannot let this opportunity slip through our hands. If you would permit me, I would like to repost segments of your post, if you would permit me. So at this point, I'm gonna, before I allow you to say your last words, I want to make 2 announcements. One is eUnity Solutions is getting ready to do the next cohort of the Diversity and Cultural Sensitivity course, starting September 22nd. It is a 6-week program, totally 100% online, and you get a D&I certificate at the end. Why are we doing this? We're doing this for those companies, those leaders, those employees, business owners who are serious about building anti-racial and inclusive work culture, to help them, teach them how to build those inclusive work cultures and also how to leverage the diverse talent that you already have in your organization. What is that going to do for you? It's going to improve your team performance. It's going to improve productivity, job satisfaction, as patients talked about, retention, engagement, return on your investment, and global impact. So if you want more information on this, you can reach us on our website. It's www.eunityeducation.online or eunitysolutions.com. Linda, if you can do me a favor, please put that link on the our Facebook chat. It is www.eunityeducation.online or www.eunitysolutions.com if you want more details on that. Enrollment ends September 11th. Second announcement is eUnity Solutions has accepted the challenge, a 21-day racial equity challenge led by the United Way of Delaware and YWCA of Delaware. I am inviting each and every one of you to join us in this fight. This 21-day challenge is only 5 days old, and I've had so many aha moments. That's all I can say. There's activities that you get to do every day. You get an email every morning. Once you register, it's Delaware Racial Equity Challenge.org. And I will also add that to the Facebook chat. You can really get so much out of this. Learn about you, learn about racial things racial inequalities within your own community, within Delaware, if you live in Delaware, within Pennsylvania, any state in the nation. It is a journey that we all need to engage in. So I invite you to join eUnity Solutions on that link. Select eUnity Solutions as your team. Let us do this together. Let us learn. And at the end, we're going to have a debriefing to really talk about what we each learned from really living these moments. So with that said, that's all my announcements. And I'm going to give it up to you, Patience, to share your last words.
Oh my, this has been really good. You got me to tear up there in that last one, because for that post in particular, and this morning I shared with you that I'm not active on Facebook, and that is on purpose, for my own emotional well-being. But really, I think that sums up kind of where I come from in this work, and even as I strive to be a better human being. One of the things that, especially now in our organizations, in our society, is that when we talk about Black lives and Black Lives Matter, particularly centering the experiences of people who are enslaved descendants of enslaved people, I think people think, oh, it's a replacement strategy. It's not a replacement strategy, because trust me, I don't want your life. What it is that for far too long, we're keeping people, particularly Black people, on the sidelines. And Black people have disabilities. Black people are in the LGBTQ+ community. Black people have other marginalized identities. And so when we center those voices, we create a more inclusive society for all of us. So I really want to thank you for inviting me here. And I think that experience that you highlighted, it really digs deep, because it happened at the time when the leader of this country had referred to African countries as shithole countries. And so it was part of that, and people are on, different sides of this. What I will say is that it is never okay to reduce another human being so that you can elevate yourself. It is never okay to push somebody else so that you can get up. It is never okay to stand on somebody. It is never okay to dim someone else's light. It is never okay, because trust me, everyone gets their own opportunity and their time to shine. And so as we continue to strive to be human beings, I want to encourage everyone, especially even with the 21-day racial justice challenge that you just highlighted. I want to encourage all of us, those attending, those online, to really dig deep and find out what we can be doing better, what we can be doing differently today than we did yesterday, and how we can continue to grow as human beings. And with that, I really thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation with you. I have been, it's been a really great, engaging conversation, and I thank you for creating this platform. I know it's not always easy. You juggle so much with your own different intersections of identity, and you have to reach out, coordinate, and create this platform. And that speaks to the kind of person you are, and that this work is not just something you do, but it is a part of who you are. So I just want to thank you for being who you are and for sharing yourself with me today.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. I celebrate you. I thank you to all of our audience and for really participating in this conversation. You were simply phenomenal. I thank you for your talent, your expertise, and for everything you do in your organization as well as in your community. All I can say is we will continue this. Please, open invitation, come back anytime. And I hope you particularly can join the challenge so we can really have a debriefing at the end. You will be awesome with that. You know, let me just take a quick peek. I'm mindful of your time to see. Linda says, thank you, sis. And Catherine
Shout
says,
out
so
to
true.
Linda, by the way. Hi, sis.
Linda's, hi, sis, she says. And Catherine says, this world can be a better place if we all love each other for who they are. So true. And Brenda says, thank you so much. And, you know, I know we're out of time. We're past the hour. So if anybody has questions about the course or anything, please hit me up on social media or on our website or even in the chat on Facebook, and I will respond back to you. Patients, please get some rest. Put your feet up. I know you had a tough week, but just get the best rest of your week. And same to our audience. And with that said, I love you all, and we will continue with this conversation and see you next Saturday. Love you all.